Good evening and welcome. Tonight we're going to begin reading this really cool book called On This Day, A History of the World in 366 Days. We're going to be reading the January chapter because that's where the calendar starts, and that's the month that we're in currently. I'm also having an eczema flare-up on this finger, so just ignore the band-aid. I hope it's not too distracting. So let's dive right in to January. And I'm going to use a pencil. Let me grab one real quick. There we go. Let's use a pencil to help us read January 1st. In 45 BCE, the Julian calendar. In ancient Rome, a new calendar named after ruler Julius Caesar came into use. In this calendar, the length of a year became the number of days we know today, 365, increasing to 366 every fourth year. In 1959, the Cuban Revolution. Nearly 6 years of civil war between the Cuban government and communist rebels came to an end. Revolutionary leader Fidel Castro overthrew President Fulgencio Batista, who fled to the Dominican Republic at dawn. Castro seized power and remained in charge of Cuba for 49 years until 2008. And in 2002, the euro. With the new euro currency entering circulation, 12 countries in the European Union replaced their national currencies with the euro banknotes and coins. Born on this day in 1894 was Satyendra Nath Bose, that's how you say it, mathematician and physicist from British-occupied India. German-born U.S. physicist Albert Einstein was a friend of Bose and built on Bose's theories in some of his own work. Also on this day, in 1801, Italian astronomer Giuseppe Piazzi spotted the dwarf planet Ceres, the biggest object ever discovered in the asteroid belt. In 1863, U.S. President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation during the U.S. Civil War, freeing millions of enslaved people. In 1892, Ellis Island Immigration Station in New York Harbor started processing European immigrants. The first was Irish teenager Annie Moore. Moving on to January 2nd. 1975, Mysterious Monarchs. U.S. biologist Kenneth C. Brugger first documented the winter location of the monarch butterfly in the mountains of Mexico. He found forested slopes covered with millions of butterflies that had traveled south from the U.S. and Canada for more than 3,000 miles. In 2004, Stardust Sample. Flying close to Comet Wild 2, NASA's Stardust space probe grabbed samples of dust left in the comet's wake. It became the first ever spacecraft to take a sample from a comet and bring it back to Earth. In 1879, Cricket Hat Trick. Nicknamed the Demon Bowler, Australian cricketer Fred Spofforth bowled out 3 English batsmen with 3 balls in a row. This was the first ever hat trick in Test cricket at a match held at the Melbourne Cricket Ground in Australia. Born this day in 1920 was Isaac Asimov, U.S. author and biochemist. He was a celebrated science fiction writer and editor of around 500 books about space, science, and robots. His most famous works are the Foundation and Robot series. Also on this day in 1492, the surrender of the Spanish city of Granada to Christian forces marked the end of more than 700 years of Islamic rule in Spain. In 1929, Canada and the U.S. agreed to redirect the Niagara River to reduce erosion and protect the Niagara Falls. In 1963, the Viet Cong won its first major victory at the Battle of Abac during the Vietnam War. Moving on to January 3rd. Let me know if there's any January birthdays out there, so you can see what happened on your birthday in history. If you were born on January 3rd, in 1868 was the beginning of the Meiji Restoration. Emperor Meiji announced that Japan was back under the direct rule of the emperor after almost 7 centuries of control by warlords known as shoguns. In 1888, drinking straw. U.S. inventor Marvin Stone received a patent for his invention of an artificial straw made by twisting paper into the shape of a tube. He was fed up with ryegrass straws spoiling the taste of his drinks. In 1792, the rights of women. British writer and early champion of women's rights Mary Wollstonecraft finished A Vindication of the Rights of Women, a book in which she argued that women are equal to men and deserve the same rights to a full education. Born this day in 1892 was J.R.R. Tolkien, British author. His most popular books, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings trilogy, are set in Middle-earth, a fantasy world of his own creation. Also on this day, in 1925, political leader Benito Mussolini became dictator of Italy, announcing that he would rule by force if necessary. In 1957, the first electric watch, the Hamilton Electric 500, was launched in the U.S. It was unreliable, constantly requiring new batteries. In 2019, a lander successfully touched down on the far side of the moon for the first time as part of the Chinese mission Chang'e 4. January 4th, 1944, Operation Carpetbagger. Allied forces carried out the first of more than 3,000 air missions to drop essential supplies and weapons. These items were delivered by parachute to resistance fighters across large parts of Nazi-occupied Europe. 1936, topping the charts. U.S. magazine Billboard published the first music hit parade, a list of the week's best-selling songs. More than 80 years later, it still releases weekly charts of the most popular songs and albums, as well as charts split by different types of music. 2010, Tower in the Desert. The Burj Khalifa officially opened in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. It stands about 2,717 feet tall and has more than 160 floors. Born this day in 1809 was Louis Braille, French teacher. Totally blinded by a childhood accident, he designed the writing system named after him. Braille consists of raised dots on paper that visually impaired people can read with their fingers. Louis Braille's birthday is now celebrated as World Braille Day. Also on this day, in 1853, Solomon Northup was freed from slavery in Louisiana. The memoir of his experiences, 12 Years a Slave, was made into an award-winning film in 2013. 1906, South Africa's cricket team scored their first international test match win in a 4-day game against England. 2007, Nancy Pelosi became the first woman speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives. Moving on to January 5th. In 1709, the Great Frost. Temperatures across Europe plummeted overnight and stayed icy for 3 months during the coldest winter for 500 years. Rivers and lakes were covered in ice and thousands of people froze to death. 1886, Jekyll and Hyde. Published on this day, the book Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Scottish writer Robert Louis Stevenson tells the story of a respected doctor with a split personality. 1985, Festival of Ice. The first Harbin Ice and Snow Festival opened in China. Each year, millions of people come to Harbin to see carved ice sculptures as big as buildings at the 2-month-long festival. Born this day in 1941, Hayao Miyazaki, Japanese animation director. He co-founded Studio Ghibli, a Japanese animation studio, and wrote and directed animated feature films such as Spirited Away and My Neighbor Totoro. My favorite is Princess Mononoke. Also on this day, in 1769, Scottish inventor James Watt patented improvements to the steam engine, kick-starting the Industrial Revolution. 1941, Troops from Australia and the UK defeated Italy in the Battle of Bardia in Libya during World War II. 2005, U.S. scientists identified a new planet in the solar system. Smaller than the moon, Eris is now known as a dwarf planet. January 6th, in 1942, around the world. The Pacific Clipper seaplane landed in New York, completing the first commercial plane flight round the world. The flight had covered 20,000 miles in just over a month of flying. 1681, Butler versus Butcher. The first ever boxing match recorded in the newspapers was fought between the Duke of Albemarle's Butler and Butcher in England. There weren't many rules, but the beefy Butcher was declared the winner. 2018, a giant hot drink. Mexicans celebrated Three Kings Day with the largest ever cup of hot chocolate. It contained 1,272 gallons of hot cocoa made from locally grown chocolate. Born this day, 1967, is A.R. Rahman, Indian film score composer. He has sold more than 200 million albums worldwide. Also on this day, in 1863, U.S. inventor James Plimpton launched a new fashion for roller skating when he patented his four-wheeled rocker skates. 1929, Mother Teresa, a Roman Catholic nun, arrived in Kolkata, India, where she devoted her life to caring for the poor. 1987, U.S. astronomers reported that they had detected light from the birth of a faraway galaxy 12 billion years after it happened. Next is January 7th, 1990, Dangerous Angle. Tilting more than 16 feet, the Leaning Tower of Pisa in Italy was closed for the first time in its 800-year history for urgent restoration work to stop it from toppling over. 1958, the Flying V. U.S. guitar maker Gibson patented the futuristic Flying V electric guitar. Sales were slow at first, but rock stars like Jimi Hendrix turned this V-shaped instrument into a musical icon. 1785, Up, Up, and Away. French inventor Jean-Pierre Blanchard and U.S. scientist John Jeffreys became the first people to fly between countries when they traveled from the UK to France in a hot air balloon. Born this day, 1985, Lewis Hamilton, British Formula One driver. He has broken the record for Formula One wins, but he is also an avid campaigner against racism, championing diversity in motorsports. Also on this day, 1914, French boat Alexandre Lavallee was the first to sail along the Panama Canal, which connects the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. 1939, in a lab in Paris, French physicist Marguerite Perry discovered francium, an extremely rare radioactive element. 1985, Japan launched Sakigake, its first interplanetary spacecraft. January 8th, in 1297, Monk of Monaco. Francesco Grimaldi disguised himself as a monk to gain access to the Rock of Monaco. He then seized Monaco's fortress in an event commemorated on the country's coat of arms. 1912, African National Congress. The South African Native National Congress, or SANNC, the forerunner of the African National Congress, or ANC, was formed in South Africa. Its mission was to fight against the unjust and oppressive treatment of black people. 2007, What's That Smell? A pungent smell of rotting eggs filled New York City streets on this day, alarming citizens. Fire trucks scrambled to detect the source without success, but fortunately the mystery odor faded that same day. Born this day, two incredible musicians, we have 1935, Elvis Presley, U.S. singer. The biggest star of the rock and roll era, the King, as he was known, made the new sound popular with his unique dance moves and soulful voice. And in 1947 was David Bowie, British singer and songwriter. A master performer and a genius at reinventing himself, Bowie was a leading voice in glam rock. I'm going to adjust my microphone real quick. Hold on. I'm just going to slide it down a little more. There we go. Also on this day, in 1493, Italian explorer Christopher Columbus reported spotting mermaids off the coast of modern-day Dominican Republic. They turned out to be large, gray ocean-dwelling mammals called manatees. In 1887, Lakota warrior Crazy Horse fought his last battle against U.S. soldiers at Wolf Mountain in Montana. Crazy Horse was forced to surrender due to harsh weather. Moving on to January 9th. In 1768, Roll Up, Roll Up. The world's first modern circus opened in London, UK, organized by horse rider Philip Astley. The show began with tricks on horseback around the circus ring and grew to include acrobats and jugglers. In 2007, first iPhone. U.S. entrepreneur Steve Jobs presented the first iPhone to the public. With a camera and internet browser built in, this mobile phone was called the invention of the year by Time magazine. 1816, safety lamp. There's the train. British chemist Sir Humphrey Davy trialed his new safety lamp featuring an enclosed flame to protect miners. Previous lamps had open flames, which triggered explosions with the flammable gases in coal mines. Born this day, 1908, Simone de Beauvoir, French thinker, writer, and women's rights advocate. In her books, she argued that women should have the same opportunities as men. Also on this day, in 1918, the Battle of Bear Valley, a clash between a band of Yaqui people and U.S. Army soldiers, marked the final conflict of the American Frontier Wars. 1960, the foundation stone was laid in the construction of Aswan High Dam, the world's largest embankment dam across the Nile River in Egypt. 1992, the first exoplanets, or planets orbiting stars beyond the solar system, were found by two astronomers, Alexander Wolszczan of Poland and Dale Frail of Canada. Next is January 10th. 1863, underground opening. The world's first underground rail network opened in London, UK. About 30,000 passengers traveled by steam locomotive on the Metropolitan line on the first day. 1901, striking oil. The U.S. oil industry began when crude oil started gushing from a drill at Spindletop Hill in Texas. The gusher produced 100,000 barrels of oil a day at first, and was only capped after 9 days. 1985, electric vehicle. British inventor Clive Sinclair launched the Sinclair C5 battery-powered electric vehicle. Although the pedal car was widely criticized for being impractical and unsafe, its environmentally friendly electric design was ahead of its time. Born this day in 1924, Max Roach, Black American jazz artist and music composer. He became one of the most influential jazz drummers in history. Also on this day, in 1929, the famous Tintin comic strip by Belgian cartoonist Hergé was first published in the weekly supplement Le Petit Vingtième. 1946, the first General Assembly of the United Nations organization was held in London, UK, with 51 countries represented. Also in 1946, to test the strength of radar, the U.S. Army Signal Corps bounced radio signals off the moon in an experiment known as Project Diana. Moving on to January 11th. 1922, insulin injection. The hormone insulin was first used to treat a condition called diabetes. A 14-year-old Canadian boy named Leonard Thompson received the first insulin injection. 1896, using X-rays. British doctor John Hall Edwards made the first ever medical use of X-rays to examine a patient's hand with a needle inside it. Doctors now routinely use X-rays to look inside the human body. In 2020, top tortoise. After helping to save his species through a breeding program, the giant tortoise Diego retired to the Galapagos Islands in the Pacific Ocean. Thanks to him and two other male tortoises, the giant tortoise population increased from just 15 to more than 2,000. Born this day in 1885, Alice Paul, U.S. women's rights campaigner. She was best known for championing the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which ensured equal voting rights for everyone, regardless of gender. Also on this day, in 532, a week-long riot began at a chariot race in Constantinople in the Byzantine Empire. The rioters destroyed around half the city. In 1851, the Taiping Rebellion in China started a 14-year civil war between the Qing rulers and breakaway group Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. 1964, a report by U.S. Surgeon General Luther Terry linked smoking cigarettes to lung cancer for the first time. On to January 12th. In 2014, record-breaking rap. A freestyle rap performance with improvised lyrics by the KJ52 freestyle team in Florida lasted a record-breaking 12 hours and 2 minutes. 1995 Wolf Revival. 8 gray wolves from Jasper National Park in Canada were reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park to revive the U.S. population of the species. Hunting had wiped out gray wolf populations 70 years before. In 1967, cryonics. After U.S. psychology teacher Dr. James Bedford died of cancer, his body became the first to be deep frozen through cryonics, a process that preserves a human body for possible revival in future. Born this day in 1863 is Swami Vivekananda, Hindu monk. He promoted religious tolerance and world peace, especially among young people. His birthday is celebrated as National Youth Day in India. Also on this day, in 1528, Gustav I was crowned King of Sweden. He ruled for the next 37 years, laying the foundations for modern Sweden. In 1962, U.S. Army helicopters transported hundreds of paratroopers to their target in Operation Chopper. This was the first U.S. military operation of the Vietnam War. And in 2010, a devastating earthquake in Haiti killed more than 230,000 people. On to January 13th. In 1871, drilling down. The patent for the first electric dental drill was filed by U.S. dentist and inventor George Green. This major advancement allowed for continuous high-speed dental work. 1942, a quick exit. An ejector seat was used for the first time in history during World War II. Helmut Schenk, a German jet fighter pilot, escaped successfully from his faulty aircraft by activating the system. 2008, kayaking adventure. Australians James Kistrisian and Justin Jones set a record for the longest ocean voyage on a double kayak when they arrived in New Zealand after paddling 2,000 miles from Australia. Their journey lasted 62 days. Born this day in 1596 is Jan van Goyen, Dutch painter. He created more than 1,200 paintings and 1,000 drawings in his lifetime. Most were scenic landscapes of his native Netherlands. Also on this day, in 1910, in the first public radio broadcast, an opera performance was transmitted live from New York City's Metropolitan Opera House. 2018, a message sent an error warning of an imminent ballistic missile strike on the Pacific Islands of Hawaii caused public panic. 2020, the Murchison meteorite, which landed in Australia in 1969, was confirmed to be the oldest material on Earth at 7 billion years old. January 14th, we have 1967, the Summer of Love. The Human Be-In was a festival held at a park in San Francisco, California. Poets, musicians, activists, and students all gathered to celebrate alternative lifestyles, which led to the city's famous Summer of Love. 1897, Aconcagua ascent. Argentina's Cerro Aconcagua, the highest peak in the Americas, was climbed for the first time when Swiss mountaineer Matthias Zurbriggen reached its summit at 22,834 feet. 1997, Ancient Lyceum. Greek archaeologists found an ancient site at Athens, Greece, that they believed to be the Lyceum. This was an exceptional school run by the great thinker Aristotle, who taught students philosophy, science, and poetry. Born this day in 1943, Shannon Lucid, U.S. astronaut. She spent 188 days on the Russian space station Mir, studying the effects of space travel on the human body. Also on this day, in 1761, at a place called Panipat in what is now northern India, Afghan forces clashed with the Maratha Empire in the Third Battle of Panipat. Thousands of soldiers died. 2005, Huygens became the first probe to land on a moon in the outer solar system. It arrived by parachute on Titan, the largest moon of Saturn, to take pictures and carry out tests. On to January 15th, in 1797, Top Hat. According to stories told later, the hatter John Hetherington caused chaos when he paraded in a new hat through the streets of London, UK. Women fainted and the crowds shoved each other to get a look at the new design, the top hat. 1557, Good Queen Bess. The coronation of 25-year-old Elizabeth I was held at Westminster Abbey in London. Her 45-year reign as Queen of England was considered to be a golden era of peace, progress, and prosperity. 2009, Sully's Landing. When his plane experienced engine trouble soon after takeoff, U.S. pilot Chelsea Sully Sullenberger managed to land it safely in the Hudson River, saving the lives of all 155 people on board. Born this day in 1929, Martin Luther King Jr., Black American minister and activist. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his work as a leader of the civil rights movement in the U.S. Also on this day, in 1919, disaster struck when a tank of liquid molasses burst open and flooded the streets of Boston, Massachusetts, killing 21 people. 1962, the Derveni Papyrus was discovered in Greece. It was later dated to 340 BCE, making it the oldest manuscript ever found in Europe. 1967, the first Super Bowl took place in Los Angeles. This American football championship game became the biggest annual sporting event in the U.S. On to January 16th. In 2006, Africa's first female president. When Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was sworn in as the new president of Liberia, she became the first woman to be elected head of state of an African country. 1547, Ivan the Terrible. Teenager Ivan IV was crowned the first Tsar of Russia. He ruled through terror and was prone to murderous rages, becoming known as Ivan the Terrible. 738 CE, Tikal takeover. According to records etched in stone, a warrior named Siachkak, Firesborn, marched into the Mayan city of Tikal, which is now in modern-day Guatemala. The ruler Chaktok Ikchak, Jaguar Pa, died the very same day, and Siachkak took charge. Born this day in 1932, Dian Fossey, U.S. conservationist. She spent 2 decades in the forests of Rwanda studying mountain gorillas, and later wrote the book Gorillas in the Mist about her experiences. Also on this day, in 1913, Indian mathematician Srinivasa Ramanujan wrote to Cambridge University in the UK, outlining his solutions to many math problems, some of which remained unsolved by experts at the time. He was invited to Cambridge, where he made important contributions to mathematics. 1979, the Shah of Iran, Mohammad Pahlavi, was forced into exile after protests and violent demonstrations by Islamic rebels. On to January 17th, 1921, sawed in half. British magician P.T. Selbit became the first person to perform the illusion of sawing someone in half. His assistant Betty Barker survived the trick at his London show to the relief of the audience. 1893, Hawaiian Queen. A U.S. coup forced Queen Liliuokalani, the final monarch of Hawaii, to step down. Hawaii later became the 50th state. The U.S. government has since apologized for its part in the coup. 1987, caught on camera. The coelacanth was filmed for the first time in the Indian Ocean off the east coast of Africa. This rare bony fish has been discovered in 1938. Born this day in 1964, Michelle Obama, Black American lawyer and writer. She became the first Black woman to serve as First Lady when her husband Barack Obama became the U.S. President. Also on this day in 1920, the 18th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution banned the sale of alcohol in the U.S. It was only repealed 13 years later. In 1991, after Iraqi troops invaded Kuwait, the Gulf War began with bombing raids against Iraq by a U.S.-led alliance of nations. 1997, Norwegian explorer Bjørge Ausland became the first person to make a solo crossing of Antarctica on foot. It had taken him 64 days. On to January 18th, 1943, bread ban. Sliced bread was banned in the U.S. to reduce the costs for additional labor and equipment during World War II. However, the new measure only lasted 2 months. 1911, landing at sea. An aircraft landed on a ship for the first time. The risky maneuver was carried out successfully by pilot Eugene Ely on the flight deck of the battleship USS Pennsylvania, which was anchored in San Francisco Bay, California. 1593, the Battle of Nong Sarai. King Narswan of Siam killed Crown Prince Minchit Shah of Burma in an elephant battle that ended the Burmese invasion. The day is now celebrated as Royal Thai Armed Forces Day. Born this day in 1884 is Elena Arizmendi Mejia, Mexican women's rights activist. She set up the Neutral White Cross organization to nurse the injured during the Mexican Revolution. Also on this day, in 1871, the Second German Empire was proclaimed, following the unification of German states during the Franco-Prussian War. 1912, the ill-fated expedition of British explorer Robert Falcon Scott reached the South Pole, only to find that Norwegian adventurer Roald Amundsen had arrived a month earlier. Scott's entire team perished on the return journey to base camp. I didn't know that the F in Robert F. Scott stood for Falcon. I think that's awesome. 2002, the Civil War in Sierra Leone officially ended after 11 years of conflict. On to January 19th. 1966, Indian icon. Indira Gandhi became the first female Prime Minister of India. She reduced India's reliance on other countries for food by increasing grain production. Gandhi served 2 terms before she was assassinated in 1984. 1915, Zeppelin raid. Germany used a Zeppelin L-3 airship in a bombing mission for the first time. The attack on Great Yarmouth in England resulted in 2 deaths. Further Zeppelin raids killed about 500 people in the UK during World War I. 1986, virus attack. An early computer virus called Brain was created by the Pakistani brothers Basit and Amjad Farooqvi to discourage software piracy. Born this day in 1839, Paul Cézanne, French artist. He produced more than 200 still-life paintings, 900 oil paintings, and 400 watercolors during 4 decades of work. And in 1946, one of my favorite people in the world, Dolly Parton, U.S. singer. She's celebrated for making country music popular and writing more than 3,000 songs. Also on this day, in 1817, To liberate Chile, Argentinian soldiers and Chilean patriots invaded the country by crossing the Andes Mountains. In 1981, the Algiers Accords ended the Iran hostage crisis, in which 52 U.S. citizens were held hostage by Iran. The hostages returned home the next day. In 1991, invading Iraqi forces in Kuwait opened oil wells and pipelines, causing massive environmental damage. On to January 20th. In 2009, Obama presidency. Barack Obama was sworn in as the 44th president of the U.S. He was the first black person in history to be elected to the role. A lawyer and community organizer, he served as president for 8 years. 1892, basketball beginnings. 2 teams at the YMCA school in Springfield, Massachusetts played the first official basketball match. The game had been thought up by their gym teacher. I was reading about this. It was a rainy day. They had nothing to do. They invented basketball. 1885, roller coaster ride. The first U.S. patent for a roller coaster design was given to Lamarcus Thompson of Coney Island, New York. His switchback railroad reached speeds of just 6 miles per hour. Born this day in 1910 was Joy Adamson, Austrian naturalist. She carried out wildlife conservation work in Kenya and raised an orphan lioness cub named Elsa, who was eventually released back into the wild. Also on this day in 1788, the first fleet of 736 British convicts and their jailers sailed into Botany Bay in Australia, where they established a penal colony. In 1942, Nazi officials met to discuss the final solution, their plan to kill Europe's Jews by sending them to extermination camps in Poland. In 2014, half of South Korea's population fell victim to computer hacking when credit card details of around 200 million citizens were stolen. I have like a cough in my throat and I'm trying so hard not to cough and I held it in. That was very hard. You probably couldn't even tell. But anyway, on to January 21st. 1793, off with his head. Louis XVI, the King of France, was executed by guillotine after he was found guilty of high treason by the French National Convention. Thousands gathered in the Place de la Révolution in Paris to witness their former ruler meet his fate. In 1976, going supersonic. 7 years after its first flight, the supersonic airliner Concorde started regular passenger service from London, UK and Paris, France. The Concorde traveled at up to 1,354 miles per hour, twice the speed of sound. 1911, Monte Carlo Rally. In the first ever Monte Carlo automobile rally, 23 cars starting from 11 different locations drove across Europe to meet up at the finish line in Monaco. The event was an opportunity to showcase the latest car technology. Born this day, 1920, Errol Barrow, first Prime Minister of Barbados. He led the Caribbean island to independence from the UK in 1966. His birthday is now a national holiday. Also on this day, 1924, Vladimir Lenin, leader of the Soviet Union, died. His embalmed body remains on public display in a mausoleum in Red Square in Moscow, Russia. 2017, 4 million people across 160 cities in the U.S. and many other countries took part in the Women's March, a protest against U.S. President Donald Trump. 2020, scientists stated an asteroid found in the Australian village of Yarrabubba at 2.2 billion years old, making it the oldest asteroid discovered on Earth. On to January 22nd, starting here, 2006, Bolivian president. Evo Morales took office as the first indigenous president of Bolivia. He belongs to the Aymara, a South American indigenous group based in the Central Andes Mountains. 1506, Pope's bodyguards. Switzerland sent 150 soldiers known as Swiss Guards to protect Pope Julius II at the Vatican, the headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church. Today, Switzerland still sends guards to the Vatican, where they patrol in their brightly colored uniforms. 1879, Anglo-Zulu face-off. Britain waged war against the Zulus to expand its control over southern Africa. On the same day during the Anglo-Zulu War, Zulu warriors were victorious at the Battle of Isandlwana, while British forces triumphed at the Battle of Rorke's Drift. Born this day in 1912, August Strindberg, Swedish author. He is best known as a playwright. He wrote more than 60 dramas in his lifetime. Also on this day, in 1517, at the Battle of Verdania, Sultan Selim I of the Ottoman Empire conquered the Mamluk forces and seized control of Egypt. 1824. In a rare African victory against colonial powers, the Ashanti defeated British forces along the Gold Coast in Ghana. 1997. A metal piece from a disintegrating rocket fell from the sky in Oklahoma and harmlessly hit Lottie Williams, the only person to be struck by space debris. Let's go to January 23rd. In 1960, Challenger Deep. The deepest point in Earth's oceans, named Challenger Deep, was visited by humans for the first time. Jacques Piccard of Switzerland and Don Walsh of the U.S. took 5 hours to descend 35,800 feet in their submersible Trieste. 1957. Flying Frisbee. U.S. inventor Walter Frederick Morrison sold the rights to his new invention, a flying disc, to the Wham-O Toy Company, which would call it the Frisbee. It became one of the world's most popular toys. 1368, the Ming Dynasty. The coronation of General Zhu Yangzhuan of Emperor of China marked the start of the Ming Dynasty, which ruled the country for the next 3 centuries. Born this day in 1910 is Django Reinhardt, jazz musician of Romani origin. Although he lost 2 fingers in a fire, Django was a guitarist and composer who found fame throughout Europe. In 1939, Ed Roberts, U.S. activist. Paralyzed due to polio, he was the first wheelchair-bound student at the University of California and led multiple campaigns for the disability rights movement. Also on this day, in 1556, the Shanxi earthquake in China was the deadliest earthquake in recorded history. It killed around 830,000 people. In 1719, Holy Roman Emperor Charles VI merged 2 independent territories to create the nation of Liechtenstein. And in 2020, an ancient Egyptian voice was heard for the first time when British scientists made a 3D print of a mummified priest's vocal tract. Let's go to January 24th. In 41 CE, Emperor Claudius. Disgusted at the tyranny of the Roman Emperor Caligula, the imperial bodyguards assassinated him and proclaimed his uncle Claudius the new emperor. Claudius was an effective leader, and under his rule, Rome finally conquered Britain. 1984, Macintosh on sale. With a price tag of $2,500, which is around $5,000 today, the first generation Apple Macintosh personal computer went on sale in the U.S. 1848, California Gold Rush. Mill worker James W. Marshall found flakes of gold at Sutter's Mill along the Sacramento River in California. Following his discovery, prospectors flocked to the area in search of gold. Born this day, in 1864, Marguerite Durand, French women's rights activist. She founded a newspaper run exclusively by women and helped create organizations for working women. Also on this day, in 1859, Moldavia and Wallachia in Central Europe were united by Alexander Ioan Cuza. This region eventually became the country of Romania. 1986, spacecraft Voyager 2 came within 50,600 miles of Uranus and discovered 5 new moons in its orbit. 2006, the Walt Disney Company took over Pixar, the pioneering computer animation studio behind Toy Story. Let's go to January 25th. In 1995, missile scare. Mistaking Norwegian research rocket Black Brant 12 for a U.S. Trident missile, Russia prepared to launch a nuclear attack in retaliation. Thankfully, action was halted and procedures were reviewed to avoid similar incidents in the future. 1921, Robot World. The word robot was heard for the first time in Rosmovy Universalny Roboty, a science fiction play by Czech writer Karl Čapek, which featured a robotic humanoid. This originated from the Czech word robota, meaning forced labor. 2004, Life on Mars. NASA's space rover Opportunity landed on Mars, where it spent 14 years gathering information. The most exciting revelation of its mission was historical evidence of water, making it possible that life may once have existed on Mars. Born this day in 1759, Robert Burns, Scotland's national poet. He wrote around 300 poems, including Auld Lang Syne. His birthday is celebrated every year as Burns Night. Also on this day, in 1890, Nellie Bly, a U.S. journalist, completed a trip around the world in a record-breaking 72 days. In 1971, General Idi Amin seized power in Uganda. His 8-year rule was one of the most brutal leaderships in history. 2011, protests against corruption and oppression erupted in Egypt as part of the Arab Spring, a series of uprisings that spread across many Arab countries. Next is January 26, 1926, the television trial. Scottish inventor John Logie Baird made the first public demonstration of television to 50 scientists at his laboratory in London, UK. The TV would later become the center of home entertainment for millions around the world. 1905, Cullinan Diamond. The world's largest gem-quality rough diamond, weighing a whopping 3,106.75 carats, was unearthed at a mine in Cullinan, South Africa. It was later cut into 9 big pieces, the largest of which was the Great Star of Africa, now embedded in the royal scepter of the British Crown. 1924, Winter Gold. The first gold medal at the Olympic Winter Games was won by U.S. skater Charles Jutra in the 500-meter speed skating event held in Chamonix, France. The medal remains on display at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. Born this day, 1944, Angela Davis, Black U.S. activist and author. She took charge of the Communist Party USA and stood up for civil rights, racial equality, and women's rights. Also on this day, in 1564, at the Council of Trent, Pope Pius IV and key members of the Catholic Church agreed on reforms to religious doctrines. 1950, India became a republic when the Constitution of India came into effect. This day is celebrated as India's Republic Day. In 1972, Serbian flight attendant Vesna Vulovic fell 33,330 feet from an exploded aircraft and miraculously survived. On to January 27th, 1945, liberation of Auschwitz. The Nazi concentration camp called Auschwitz was liberated by Soviet forces, who found more than 7,000 survivors and hundreds of corpses. This date is now remembered as International Holocaust Remembrance Day. 2010, Apple iPad. Apple's first tablet computer was announced by CEO Steve Jobs at a press conference in San Francisco, California. The large screen made it easier to play games, read ebooks, and watch videos. 1944, Siege of Leningrad. Soviet soldiers successfully forced German troops out of Leningrad, ending the nearly 900-day-long siege of the city. 1 million Soviet civilians died of hunger or illness during the siege, the longest of World War II. Born this day in 1756, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Austrian composer. He wrote more than 600 pieces of music in his lifetime, becoming one of the world's most influential composers. Also on this day, in 1868, the Battle of Toba Fushimi started in Japan, resulting in the downfall of the Tokugawa shogunate and the beginning of the Meiji era. In 1967, the Outer Space Treaty, which banned nuclear weapons and military activities in space, was signed by the US, UK, and Soviet Union. 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed by the US, South Vietnam, Viet Cong, and North Vietnam to end the long-running Vietnam War. Next is January 28th, 1896, Speed Demon. The first person convicted of a speeding offense was Walter Arnold from Kent, UK. A police officer chased him down on a bicycle and gave him a 1 shilling fine, which is around £4 today in today's money, for breaking the speed limit of 2 miles per hour or 3.2 kilometers per hour. He was driving 8 miles per hour or 13 kilometers per hour. 1951, seabird sighting. Previously thought extinct, the Kayhoe seabird was spotted on the Pacific island of Bermuda by local teenager David Wingate, who later became a conservationist. In 1958, build with bricks. The Danish Lego Group submitted the patent for its toy building element. Interlocking Lego bricks are still based on this original patent, with about 75 billion pieces sold every year. Born this day in 1608, Giovanni Alfonso Borelli, Italian scientist. He is known as a pioneer of biomechanics, the study of the structure, function, and movement of a living organism. In 1912, Jackson Pollock, U.S. abstract expressionist artist. He created paintings by pouring or splattering paint from above. Also on this day, in 1671, plundering pirate Henry Morgan and his army of 1,500 men raided Panama, seized its capital city, and stole its national treasures. In 1871, the German states led by the Kingdom of Prussia finally defeated France at Paris, ending the Franco-Prussian War. In 1986, Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart 73 seconds into its flight when a booster engine failed. All 7 crew members died. On to January 29th. In 1845, The Raven. A mysterious narrative poem by U.S. poet Edgar Allan Poe called The Raven was first published in the Evening Mirror, bringing him instant fame. In 1886, birth of the automobile. German engineer Carl Benz applied for a patent for his invention of a 3-wheeled, gasoline-powered automobile in Berlin, Germany. Patent number 37435 marked the start of the automobile industry. In 1978, aerosol ban. Sweden became the first country to ban the use of aerosol sprays containing chlorofluorocarbons or CFCs. These compounds damage the ozone layer, a part of Earth's atmosphere that protects us from harmful radiation from the sun. Born this day in 1881, Alice Evans, U.S. scientist. Her research on bacteria in milk and cheese helped promote pasteurization, a process that destroys microorganisms in dairy products. In 1954, Oprah Winfrey, Black American TV personality. Born into poverty, she is now a billionaire thanks to her popular talk show and has donated millions to charity. Also on this day, in 1892, the Coca-Cola Company was formed in the U.S. It created one of the world's best-selling soft drinks. In 2002, U.S. President George W. Bush described Iran, Iraq, and North Korea as an axis of evil in his State of the Union address. In 2018, with its LA premiere, Black Panther became the first Marvel film to have a mainly black cast and black director. Next is January 30th, 1968, the Tet Offensive. North Vietnamese soldiers began to launch surprise military attacks on multiple sites in South Vietnam, including a U.S. embassy. Their aim was to incite rebellion among the South Vietnamese against U.S. intervention in the Vietnam War. 1959, unsinkable ship. Danish liner MS Hans Hedtoft, which had been called unsinkable and safe, hit an iceberg and sank during its first voyage. None of the 95 people aboard survived. Only a life preserver was ever recovered. 1826, first modern suspension bridge. The Menai Suspension Bridge was opened to take vehicles from the island of Anglesey to the northwest coast of Wales. This was the world's first modern suspension bridge. Born this day in 1913, Amrita Shergill, Hungarian-born Indian painter. She studied art in Paris, France, before returning to India and fused elements of Eastern and Western styles in her modern Indian art. Also on this day, in 1649, King Charles I of England was executed in front of crowds gathered in Whitehall, London, after being found guilty of treason. 1933, Adolf Hitler was sworn in as Chancellor of Germany, marking the start of his dictatorship. 1948, Mahatma Gandhi, leader of the Indian independence movement, was assassinated at the age of 78 in New Delhi by a Hindu extremist. And lastly, we have January 31st, 2015, Golfing Glory. Although 17-year-old Lydia Ko of New Zealand finished the Coates Gold Championship in Florida in second place, the tournament pushed her overall status up to the top spot. This made her the youngest player ever to be ranked world number 1. In 1982, the return of the Arabian oryx. 10 Arabian oryx were reintroduced to the deserts of Oman after decades of conservation efforts and captive breeding programs to bring them back from extinction in the wild. Born this day, I'm holding in another cough. Born this day, 1797, Franz Schubert, Austrian classical composer. He wrote about 1,500 pieces of music, mostly piano and solo songs. And 1981, Justin Timberlake, U.S. singer and entertainer. He found fame as a child star before becoming a best-selling music artist. Also on this day, in 1865, the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution abolishing slavery across the country was passed by Congress. In 1990, the first McDonald's in the Soviet Union opened, drawing hungry crowds to the fast food restaurant in Pushkin Square, Moscow. And 2020, the UK ceased to be part of the European Union, following 47 years as a member state. And that's the end for tonight. So we'll come back to this book. I think I'm going to have to buy it because it's a library book. I'll have to buy my own copy so that we can go back each month and read more about events in history. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational, and I hope that you have a very good night.